this into a question actually is
Hmm.
um so I've seen you work for like multiple brands and like not
Yep.
brands but like projects and
Hmm.
um just working with them. What are things I guess since you've worked with like a few now, what are things that
Yep.
you look out for when a brand like reaches out like when they reach out, like what things you look out for that are good, what things you look out for are bad before you start like working on a project with them?
So is that kind of like, in a sense, vetting the project before you take it on?
Yeah.
Uh, Good question. It's a few things. I feel like I kind of have an approach now which comes from, I guess you could say, experience, or kind of just like having gone through the conversations of pre-production with on a number of different projects over the years. It's something that I did not necessarily know how to communicate on when I was first starting out, but I think regardless of what the brand is or who the persons you're shooting with or that you want to work on a project with, it's so important to just be on the same page from the get-go about what are they looking for? What are they kind of like, yeah, just what are they looking for? What's the creative? Do they have a creative? Do they need help with that? Just kind of knowing what they're looking for, and then beyond that, understanding the logistics that come with it, kind of let you be more informed on the overall project, and then from that standpoint, you can kind of understand what your how you can best kind of fit within that. Whether it be from a bandwidth perspective, just like
Hmm.
simple logistics, like, hey, do I have time for this? How many days is it going to take?
Yeah.
Do I have the right gear, etc. So then actually figuring out, okay, what's the creative input going to be? What's the workload in that sense? Because I feel like a lot of people, they almost like not miss the mark. Um, but I feel like as photographers or creatives, we kind of sometimes forget that people who are reaching out to us, they aren't photographers themselves. They aren't videographers. They aren't whatever graphic designers, etc.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, not always, not to generalize, but if you're not a photographer, you maybe don't necessarily have the best understanding of, oh, okay, beyond the 1 to 2 shoot days, it's going to take X many days to edit, X many days to just like come up with the creative in X amount of time. So for the ask from their side of things is not necessarily the same ask from what is from your side, and that kind of like dissonance can sometimes cause. I feel like frustration just seeing a lot of photographer friends kind of how they communicate on things with clients, whether it be like, oh, they're paying me this much for that amount of work, etc.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to you communicating what you need to them and them communicating what they need to you, so you can kind of find that mutual, I guess, common ground between each other. So long-winded answer, but in short, it's basically if somebody reaches out, I kind of need to know, yo, what's the timeline like this looking like? Which means, when are we shooting this? When does it need to be
Hmm.
delivered by? When is this going live? Um, I'd love to know, hey, is there a creative for this? If there is a creative or some idea, what is it? Like, is there a deck? Do you know what a deck is?
No, actually.
So, all good, because I didn't. So, a deck is basically like, think about like high school, whatever. You have these like presentations in class. A deck is
Yeah.
basically that presentation, but it explains everything about the project. So, it's like a deck is a comprehensive document where if I have a deck for my project and I give you that deck, I don't even have to like talk to you about the project. You should understand what the project is just based off that
Yeah.
deck. So it
Oh
goes
wow.
into what the it usually has like a brief, which is like, oh, this is kind of why we're doing this idea. It has the idea in short. It has the goal for the project. It has timelines. It has budget. It has references for like just visual mood boards. It can also have styling. It can have makeup. It can have hair. It can have locations. It can have backdrops, compositions, lighting. Basically, just like it's very free flowing how you want decks to look from your side, but
Hmm.
that usually is the best way to kind of start a conversation. And they can be short, like decks can be 2 pages, they can be long, they can be 100. And I've kind of seen like both from different brands, like different brands, people,
Hmm.
whatever. It's just kind of a very, very helpful document to start a conversation because it kind of fills in a lot of gaps from the get go that otherwise need to be asked, like what I kind of just mentioned, like lighting, makeup, hair, sets, because all those things factor into what beyond what the idea itself is, which is super important. Kind of when you have the idea, there's so many logistics that need to go into actually creating it.
Yeah.
Um, And sometimes even if you're on location, it's kind of like figuring out, where, when, how we're going to be here, what the kind of shot it's going to be, etc. Um, so there's no kind of like right or wrong way, but again, long answer short.
Yeah.
If somebody reaches out for a project, I'm asking them, okay, what's the timeline looking like? What are the needs in terms of, you just need me to show up and shoot? Do you need me to kind of help you out with creative? Um, and then from that as well, comes the conversation about budget, which is also super important. It's kind of something that like a lot of people aren't necessarily the most comfortable with, but it's like you have to
It's
speak on
needed.
kind of, it is. It needs to be normalized more, but it is what it is. And then from there, honestly, the biggest thing is just like once I kind of feel like I'm informed on what they're asking for, what their needs are from a creative, timeline, budget, etc. perspective, then it's kind of like about coming back to me and realize and just like analyzing it in terms of, is this something I actually want to do? Do I have time for this out of the
Yeah.
gate? If I do, okay, is it creative something cool? If not, like maybe it's a pass. Or it could even be cool, but maybe it just doesn't align with kind of what I want to be doing at the given time.
Yeah.
So it's like, and it kind of goes back to the saying where it's like, if you drink from every cup, you're going to get poisoned.
Yeah.
Not to be dramatic about it, but
Yeah.
I think just in the beginning, I was saying yes to a lot more things. I just wanted to kind of like get my feet wet and kind of
Get in
make more
there.
connections, which is not to say that I'm at any place to not be doing that now. It's more so just that
You're more
I'm
selective
trying,
experience.
yeah, somewhat more like trying to be, anyways.
Yeah.
And just that honestly comes a lot more from having a better understanding of what I want to be creating as well, from a personal standpoint. And like there are still shoots that that you do more so because like the budget is somewhat better, so you might not necessarily align on what the creative is, but it might be good people and might be a good budget. So like, hey, this is good because as much as money isn't the focus, you still do need to pay rent.
Yes.
And then you have jobs. It's like, oh, the creative might be great, but the budget isn't great, but the people in the creative are great. So you know what? Why not? Let's just do this. Yeah, I probably should have mentioned it before, but I'm sure you've heard of like the whole like people project pay, where
Yeah.
it's like you kind of want two of the three. So that's kind of what I still go by, just like knowing that you have to know some like facts of the project to even know how to kind of assess the people project pay of it.
Okay. I also want to ask you, kind of ties in with this question, but
Hmm.
once you accept a project, what is like kind of your what is your process of like deciphering? Do you start with the deck and kind of lay off that, or do you kind of
Hmm.
like brainstorm off of, like, let's say you're not given a deck, you
Yeah.
kind of brainstorm ideas, or do you and reach back out to them, or is it more so you kind of just have a conversation with
Uh, yes, like all three, or
them?
like any of the above, just depending on kind of what the project is. So, it varies, but kind of like the very, very general answer would be that if you do choose to accept it, you'll probably set up some sort of, I guess, yeah, a work back schedule, which essentially is hey, if we want to shoot on, what day is it today? What day is it today? The 13th. Say it's like, hey, we want to shoot on the 23rd, and it'd be like, hey, we want to shoot on the 20. Again, the 23rd. That's a pretty quick turnaround. So I'm just don't
Yeah.
like, not the best example, but anyways, if it's like, hey, we want to shoot on the 23rd, then maybe it's like, yo, we need to have the creative locked in for the 18th, because that gives us 5 days to source the studio, source the model, source like logistics, like gear, or kind of anything that we need to acquire within that time frame. So then
Yeah.
if we need to have that locked in by the 18th, it's the 13th today, that means we probably need to have a B1 sit down, whether it be the 14th or the 15th. Following that, we need to have like a second sit down, and then from that we can kind of finalize. So again, it's very much from a case to case study, but in some form or fashion, once the project is taken on, if there is creative work that needs to be done, there is kind of a timeline for that where, if I'm doing creative on a project, I'll take what their thoughts are, I'll kind of internalize that, I'll kind of go about just thinking, okay, how do I add, I guess, my kind of vision to this and kind of how I'd want to bring this to life. I'd collect some sort of, not necessarily make a deck to send back, I could make a deck to send back depending on what the project
Yeah.
is. Um, but you, in some form or fashion, you want to kind of communicate what your idea or interpretation of what their idea is. So That's done through collecting images. That's done through creating like a shot list. Through kind of just yeah, it's kind of general, but you just kind of need to explain what your idea is, just based on what they're looking
You're
for, and then
given.
from that, yeah, exactly, and then from that you can kind of have that first check-in where it's like, I like that first check-in, and not necessarily just present like, hey, I spent 20 hours on this idea. Do you like it? No? Oh shit.
Yeah.
So I'll have like a first check-in before I go too deep into it, and I'll probably have like 2 to 3 different ideas. It was like, hey, we could. This is what you want. Okay, this is what A looks like. B looks like. C looks like. I kind of like all of them. What do you prefer? And from that, you can kind of find out. Oh, they like B. Okay, cool. And then we dive deeper into that. Let's talk in 2 days. I'll have a more fleshed out version of this. From there, you kind of you spend some time fleshing it out. You maybe get a bigger mood board. You maybe have kind of excuse me, like pardon me.
Very good.
You might have more so like you might just go deeper on what the purpose is behind it. You might go deeper on explaining why you want to do the project, why you want to shoot the way you want to shoot, and kind of what the significance of it is. So that then when you kind of come back to the second conversation about the creative, you can have a more informed talk that lets them better understand that fleshed out version of it. From there, if they have like, again, super general, but from there, if they have thoughts or things they want to change, you can kind of tweak that and have a third conversation. But if they're good with where they're at, then that can kind of just do the finalized creative right then and there.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, again, that varies, but that's kind of the general outline for things where creative needs to be done. That can be a very prolonged conversation depending on who it's with and what the ask is. It can also be a very short one depending on how, yeah, just what it is. So it's hard to say like a super. It's hard to not be general, but that kind of is the general answer.
Yeah.
But then if there's shoots where it's like more like, hey, here's the deck. We already thought of the creative. We just kind of need to show up and shoot this, which there has been. Like, there have been times I've just been doing, whether it be stills on a commercial or just kind of um, quick lookbooks or just different things where the brands already know what they want. They just kind of need something to bring it to life. Then the conversation is more so, it's a shorter conversation after that, but it's more so just
Mhm.
revolved on, okay, we need this studio, we need this lighting, we need this gear. Let's get it done kind of thing. And it's more so about communicating what the logistics look like afterwards as well in terms of when they need images back, etc. But yeah, and that conversation obviously carries into projects where there is creative needed as well. But the difference is just how much time you need to spend talking with creative or not talking about it, if they need help with it or if they don't need help with it.
Okay, that's a really good answer, honestly, because from at least a smaller photographer standpoint, you don't really know how
Mm-hmm,
that whole thing rolls out. So,
for sure.
um, and like there's all obviously a lot of factors that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and next question I want to ask you actually is more so about your photography rather than like
Yeah.
projects and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
when I look at your photos, I feel like there is a roughly like a message behind each one,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like they're shot with a purpose. I wanted to know when you're either you can either say either shooting for a brand or like a creative
Yeah.
or personal. How do you sort of get your message across through your photos?
Mm. Interesting. Hmm. That's a good question. I think it all comes back to not necessarily the message, but just kind of like the intention, where they're kind of the
Intention.
same thing. Yeah, but that's not to put words in your mouth at all. Just like how I
Mhm.
kind of interpret that, where it's I don't necessarily shoot images with a message in mind. Like I do have kind of along my journey as a creative or as a photographer, I've kind of gone through different dips of kind of digging deeper into why I want to create the work I want to create, etc. Um, so it's not necessarily that I attach specific messages to each image. It's more so it's kind of overall like whether it be feeling you hope for kind of people to see or even myself to feel from their work,
Mhm.
or it's kind of a general message that you'd want people to get. So it's not necessarily specific to each image, or maybe it is. Um, but in terms of the intention, it's more so kind of about not having a style because that's again kind of vague, but I guess personally for me, it kind of goes back to my bad. I'm also just like I haven't been asked this question, so I'm like I'm trying to
No,
I'm
you're fine.
answering. I'm
You're
like
fine.
thinking.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it as I'm answering it.
Yeah.
Honestly though, it just comes back to a lot of kind of where I was myself inspired to kind of pick up photography and get into it. Where when I was starting out, I'd see a lot of images from these really great photographers that kind of, not to be dramatic, but like moved and kind of touched me in a specific way. Where I had this kind of very like inspired kind of an awe emotional reaction to work, whether it be seeing this image of person, somebody you've never met, but feeling this like personal connection to them, or just kind of seeing these scenes that I felt related to my own experience in a
Mhm.
very specific way. So it's more so up until recently, it's been more so about the emotion versus like a specific message. I mean,
Mm.
the message that can be attached to that emotion, which is kind of this sense of personal stories, sense of connection, sense of like intimacy, in a human way. I think can just be kind of can be connected to self-expression or to identity or to kind of these different things that are so pivotal, but that kind of need to be figured out as you're going along. Recently, though, and that can kind of be seen in like different images where, whether it be with athletes, whether it be on brands, whether it be like just random offshoots, I think, and a lot of people say it, so I'm not trying to like just hop on that bandwagon,
Yeah.
but
No, you're good.
it's really about like photographed in person for who they are and kind of like just, I don't know, I've had a lot of thoughts just with the fact that like everybody's lives are kind of, I don't want to say crazy, but it's easy to get caught up in what you're doing yourself and understand like every single person like on earth is kind of going through not the same thing, but
Yeah.
is has as many thoughts, has as many kind of experiences, etc. And it's kind of bringing that to the forefront, especially when doing portraits. It's like it's about getting a nice image, but it's also trying to like capture, or not even capture, it's just, yeah, I guess capture part of their personality, kind of like in a way have a very kind of close feeling to them through that, where
Mm.
it's something that they themselves aren't related to, or that somebody else who's seen it can relate to. Um, like even recently, that's kind of been developed on a bit more, where it's been this kind of process of understanding how art can actually help you deal with your own kind of past experiences or trauma or whatnot. So kind of digging deeper into, okay, why is that a focal point? My kind of thought process has been going into more, okay, how do you actually touch on things that have been of very personal significance to me growing up, whether that be identity, whether it be family, whether that be mental health, etc. And
Mm.
that's not to say that each image speaks on that, because they don't, but from a project standpoint, that's kind of been focuses in like upcoming work that I'm kind of, yeah, working on right now. Um, and it's been a process, but yeah, it's kind of, I think messages change. I
Yeah.
think intentions change, but it's ultimately kind of just this representation of what your style is, which at the core, because like not to go on a tangent, but with like
Mhm.
style, that's something that I kind of, especially when I was starting out, was very. I just had a lot of thoughts about it. It was kind of something that stressed me out, where it's like, oh, I want my work to look like this, or like that, or this, and kind of
Mm.
this idea of style was very central within my own kind of contemplations about the work that I was creating, and kind of just taking a step back from that over time, and just realizing that, you know, I think style gets connected to success in a lot of ways, where you might see a photographer who is super successful, and you see their style, and you kind of like, whether it be subconscious or consciously, connect their style to their success in the space. So kind of taking a step back and understanding that like, yo, everybody's stuff looks different. That's cool, and putting the focus more so from an outward perspective to more inward, where like your style at the end of the day is whatever you like, as simple as it
Mhm.
is. I don't think it really needs to be trickier than that. Like, what's your music taste? It's like, hey, whatever you like. What's your like fashion style? It's whatever you like. And kind of with it, even within taking images, it's kind of when you can kind of tap in to be more intuitive with what you're doing versus analytical. I think it allows you to better express your own style. Where it's like, I don't know, even with like editing or whatnot, I've kind of like I do really like colors and whatnot. I've been kind of dipping into black and white, but I love colors. I love for it to be saturated. I love for it to be vibrant, but not too vibrant.
Mhm.
And have a certain warmth to it. But that's something that comes from like kind of intuitive feeling, where it's not me. If I'm editing an image, I'm not going to go into being with a predetermined idea like, hey, I want this red to look like this red. It's more just like you make these gradual adjustments based on like intuition. When it kind of like feels like it's in the right spot, that's kind of when you know that it is.
Mhm.
Which is something that like I did not do starting out. I'm definitely still working on it, but yeah, I think it's yeah. You asked me what the message kind of like didn't throw me off as like, oh, I haven't thought about it in that way.
Yeah, because it's like
Um,
it's a very like tricky kind of thing to say
hmm
because like it's either message or intention, really. With your photos, but it's like no, I get what you mean though, because like your
yeah,
style, like of each photographer, like I can tell, like I've talked to a few photographers now and like a few artists,
hmm
and most of them, for majority of them at least, have basically told me like their inspiration comes either from like, things they see, things they
yeah,
wear, things they perceive, things they grew up on, and
yeah,
then they emulate it through their art. And
hmm
I always want to ask like kind of questions more geared towards the guest because I when I did
for
look at
sure.
I go over like over the Instagrams
hmm
and that's one of the first things that like came out was like oh like these are very like there's very intentional photos for the most part
hmm
and very
hmm
like um I want to say curated but like kind of curated in a sense like
No,
kind of
you can
like
say it. They
yeah
definitely are.
yeah like curated in the sense like the way like the composition and stuff is shot like certain ways and
hmm
certain to get a certain feel from them, right?
hmm
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you about that. But I think we're gonna wrap things up on the podcast. Thank you for being on. It was a pleasure. You can
No,
let the people know where to find you.
of course. Thank you so much for having me. See, I guess I didn't even say hi in the beginning, but I'm Anthony Niska. So yeah, on IG it's just Anthony.Niska, spelled with an N like November, not an M. Um, yeah, pretty much that's it. Like I'm on Twitter, but I'm not on Twitter. And I've got a
Mhm,
website which is just anthonyniska.com. Um, doing a lot of work right now with Kickback Connect on Instagram and Tier Zero. So
mhm.
yeah, if you want, my work's kind of up on my page or on those pages for the foreseeable future.
Alrighty, all right, and thank you, anybody who's listening. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And if you're listening on any of those platforms, we're available on YouTube. And for any more information, talklypodcast.com. We shall talk to you guys next week.